David was enjoying a quiet morning when two strangers in blue uniforms appeared, slapping an eviction notice on his doorstep. Shocked, he realized they were trying to evict the chief of police. But when he flashed his badge, their smirks faltered, yet they didn't back down. The fight was just beginning. What happened next? Even David didn't see it coming. The day had started like any other for David Thompson, the chief of police. He stood on his porch, a mug of coffee in hand, enjoying the early morning quiet as the sun began to rise over his suburban neighborhood. It was peaceful, too peaceful in fact, until two figures in matching blue uniforms appeared on his driveway. "Morning, sir," the man at the front of the pair said, flashing a smirk as he stepped forward. There was something about him that didn't sit right with David. "We need to talk about your property." David's brow furrowed as he glanced between the two strangers. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice steady but a hint of wariness in it. The woman at the side of the man extended her arm, handing David a letter. "This is a formal eviction notice," she said coldly. "You have 24 hours to vacate." David's pulse quickened, but it wasn't fear. No, it was the sheer audacity of the situation. He stared at the letter in his hand, eyes narrowing. He'd seen his fair share of criminal activity, but this was beyond strange. His gaze flicked to the badges they were wearing, badges that didn't look right. They were poorly forged, the kind of cheap imitation that anyone with a basic knowledge of law enforcement would recognize. He squinted harder, disbelief settling in his gut. These weren't law enforcement officers. They weren't even close. They were nothing more than HOA enforcers, trying to play a dangerous game by pretending they had authority they didn't. The audacity of it all. David's hand tightened around the notice, a mix of anger and confusion swirling within him. Who would dare try to evict him? The chief of police? His mind raced. Was this some kind of sick joke? A prank? He looked down at the letter again, trying to make sense of it. But no matter how many times he read it, the reality didn't change. The gravity of the situation hit him hard. This wasn't just about the notice. It was about the challenge to his authority. But there was one thing he knew for sure. Whoever was behind this was making a serious mistake, and he wasn't about to let them get away with it. David didn't hesitate. His fingers found the cold metal of his badge in his coat pocket, and without a second thought he pulled it out, holding it up with a stern, unwavering expression. "You've got the wrong person," he said, his voice sharp and commanding as he flashed the badge in front of them. But the response he got was not what he expected. The man, still standing there with a smirk that seemed to mock him, barely reacted. "No, sir," the man said, his tone as casual as if they were discussing lawn care. "You're trespassing, and we've been instructed to clear the premises. HOA rules apply." David's eyes narrowed, the words burning into him. His jaw clenched. Hatred flared in his chest, his blood beginning to boil. How dare these imposters stand there, pretending to have authority, trying to push him off his own property? He was the chief of police. He had earned every ounce of the authority that came with his position, but here they were, disregarding it with terrifying ease. For a moment, David felt the familiar rush of helplessness, that sickening feeling of being trapped. They weren't just challenging him. They were hiding behind the veil of bureaucratic power, using fake authority to enforce rules that had no bearing on him. His mind raced, struggling to comprehend how far people would go when they thought they could hide behind rules and the illusion of power. The woman beside the man watched him with a strange sort of detachment, as if they were fully aware of the charade they were pulling off, and it didn't seem to matter. Their confidence was maddening. She didn't have the right to even step onto his property, yet she stood there, calm and unbothered, as if she were in control of the situation. David's fingers dug into the railing, his knuckles white, his body tense. This wasn't just about an eviction notice. It wasn't even about the violation of his personal space. This was an affront to everything he had worked for. His trust in the system, his authority, everything he had built in this city. They were tainting it. The idea that these people, with their fake badges and fake rules, could try to undermine him like this only fueled the rage swelling inside him. This wasn't just a fight over land. It was a fight for respect. And David wasn't about to back down. David's mind was a blur of rapid thoughts as his instincts took over. The anger that surged through him was nothing new. It was familiar, like an old friend. But this time, it wasn't just about protecting his property. It was about his very identity, his position, and the audacity of these imposters standing on his lawn. His fingers were steady as he reached for his phone. With a calm that betrayed the storm inside him, he dialed his own department. His voice, low and controlled, carried the weight of authority. "Trace these people. They're fake. I need backup." The call was brief, but the order was clear. Within minutes, officers would be on their way to deal with this farce. David wasn't about to let them think they could get away with it. He turned back to face the two fake enforcers, his eyes sharp, his gaze cold as ice. "You've made a big mistake," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The woman's confidence faltered for just a moment, barely noticeable, but enough for David to see it. The man, on the other hand, squared his shoulders and puffed out his chest, attempting to project authority. "It doesn't matter," he shot back, trying to sound unbothered. "We've been told to take action." David's rage ignited. The absurdity of it all, the complete lack of respect for who he was, what he stood for, and the rules he enforced, was too much. "You've just picked the wrong person to mess with," he snarled, the words dripping with contempt. Without another word, he turned sharply on his heel and marched back into his house. His pulse was racing now, but there was no fear, only the sharp focus of a man who knew exactly what needed to be done. Moments later, the unmistakable sound of sirens filled the air. Uniformed officers swarmed his driveway, their presence a physical reminder of the power that came with his position. The two fake enforcers barely had time to react before they were surrounded, their faces draining of color as they realized they had made a serious mistake. David stood in the doorway, watching, his anger simmering beneath the surface, knowing that this was only the beginning. The moment the real officers arrived, David saw their faces change from smugness to confusion. They realized too late who they were dealing with. One tried to run, but he was caught in an instant. The two imposters were taken into custody, and as they were led to a patrol car, David couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. He watched the scene unfold from his porch, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly ebbing away. They tried to play him. They tried to enforce their own false rules and assume authority over him. But in the end, the fake HOA enforcers were nothing more than criminals. David took one final glance at the eviction notice, now a symbol of how far people would go to try to undermine the system. A wicked sense of satisfaction washed over him. Justice had been restored.